Today we're gonna see just how easy it is to make these awesome scroll cases. Stay tuned. Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to Skill Tree. Now, I was talking with a friend recently, and we stumbled on something that I thought was a pretty genius idea. The idea came after seeing those little craft paper tubes that they use to mail things, and wondering if they could be used as a base to make a scroll case without actually having to work with leather and such, because it already gives you the general shape. You would just have to slap whatever cover you want on it, and boom, scroll case. And it was so tempting of an idea that I couldn't resist. I needed to play with it. So that's what we're doing today. We are playing with the idea of making scroll cases out of just like craft paper tubes. So as I want to do, I did way too much research online to find different options, ordered a bunch of different variations of just everything, and then didn't even get to most of the different things I wanted to try out because it's way too much for one video. So the idea started with mailing tubes. But after looking them up, I actually found that these little craft paper storage tube things were cheaper to get in bulk. And I wouldn't have to replace the plastic insert of the mailing tubes because the entire thing is just craft paper. So since they were cheaper and easier, I decided to go for these. The only downside is these are a set size, so unless you like cut them open or splice them together, you're not going to be able to make them longer or thicker or anything like that. Whereas the mailing tubes come in all different variations of sizes. Because of that, I also got some of these craft paper tubes, which are basically like toilet paper rolls, but much stronger. They're what the mailing tubes are made out of. I got this set that has 3 different sizes in the hopes that I can use them to fit into each other, kind of like how that little container tube has that thinner insert that lets a cap fit over it. I got a variety of other stuff because I wasn't quite sure how I was gonna do this, including some thin chipboard and some craft paper. I also had cardboard off to the side, some regular paper. I was ready to play. But let's go to the kind of pre-made tube first to test out the actual concept, the idea of, hey, can we make a scroll case just by slapping something on the outside of a tube, and will it look good enough without investing a bunch of time and effort and money into it? Because that's the purpose of the idea. We want to see if this is like a cheat code. So the first thing I want to do is see if I can glue a piece of paper to the inside to look like it has a design. I have this book of different pattern pieces of paper that I have for my bookbinding supplies. It's basically what's supposed to go at the front and the end of a book. You know that like pattern piece of paper before the book actually begins that connects the pages to the case? I think they're called end papers, I forget, but you can get a whole book of them with all a bunch of different pretty patterns, and that's what I used. But to get the piece of paper that's gonna go inside it, first I have to know what size to cut. So I measured the diameter of the circle and then used math to find how long it is around, which will be the length of the piece of paper I'm cutting out, the circumference, which I hadn't heard that word since I was in elementary school, and I hope I just gave you guys some flashbacks. Once I had that, I measured how tall the tube is on the inside, which will be the height of the piece of paper that I'm cutting out. Now with those 2 different measurements, I marked them on that piece of paper and then used my little paper cutter, because I am bad at cutting straight with scissors. I don't know why, it's like a curse of mine, to cut out the decorative paper on those lines. Then I rolled it up and tested it inside the tube to see if it would fit, which was hard to get footage of because it is dark in there. So I had to use the light on my phone just to give you a look of it. I found that no matter what measurement I used, it always either overlapped a little bit, or when I cut it back to get rid of the overlap, then it was too small. So you'll see it has a little gap, and that's just because of my hubris. But generally it seemed better to have an overlap than not. And it's probably just because of the thickness of the material, or my math is wrong. I'm gonna go with the thickness of the material. With the paper all tested, I decided to go back into all of the different places the paper isn't gonna go and paint them this pink, because the white looked too much like a little craft tube. I want it to look like it was made with purpose. And I felt like the pink matched the paper well enough, but gave it a little bit of brightness. While that was drying, I decided I wanted to put the paper kind of on the tops and bottoms of the tubes. I do this by tracing the different areas that I want to cover with the paper, then using this compass to measure out the width of the material and trace that around so that it'll fit inside the material rather than being too big. Since I'm working with all these different measurements and I don't necessarily want to cut them out of my paper until I'm sure that they're gonna work, I'm doing a lot of this on sort of a thin chipboard, a thin like craft paper. which also serves, if they work, that I can use those as templates later on. But since they seem to fit, I use them to measure out different circles on my pattern paper, cut the pattern paper out, and then start going about gluing it into the tube. I'm using this bookbinding glue because by design it works well with paper. I cover the inside of the tube with it and then roll up the piece of paper I want to line the inside of the tube. I roll it smaller than the tube itself so I can get it all the way to the bottom without the glue catching it, and then I let it unravel. Once it's unraveled, I can sort of shimmy it into place while the glue's still wet, and then go over the inside with more glue so that the seams of the paper are kind of glued together as well and it won't catch later. I try to use like my bone folder tools to smooth it in and make sure there's no air bubbles, but it's hard to do in a tube and it is even harder to show you, so let's just hope there isn't any. After the inside was glued, I went and glued all of the different little circles to any tops and bottoms that I wanted to be patterned. Okay, that's a lot of the inside covered. Now we need to do the outside, which is the body of the scroll case. I decided to use this green handkerchief that we had left over from going to different LARPs. I thought it went really well with the pink and the pattern of the paper. And at this point, I think I had decided that I was going for kind of like a hobbity scroll case. This was originally gonna be my tester, so I was just kind of playing with different things, but I got so invested in it, it became the main project. So I ironed out all the creases so that it would be flat enough to cut from. Then I cut it in half, mostly so I'd have straight lines to measure from. And then I used this tape measure to measure out the areas that I would be covering, since math didn't work so well last time. This doesn't work the exact same amount, so there must be some shenanigans going on, and I can't just blame the math. To make it easier to cut out on the fabric, since fabric likes to move a lot, I made another template. It was bigger than the little sheets of craft paper that I had though, so I taped two together. This made it a lot easier to lay down and mark not only the piece that I wanted to cut out for the bottom of the scroll case, but also for the cap. I made sure to leave a little bit of extra measurement on the tops and bottoms so that I could kind of roll it over rather than having it cut straight off, because then you'll just be left with that little bit of craft paper showing through, and I can always cut off extra if I don't like that. But once I had those pieces cut out, it was really simple. All I used was some spray adhesive on the outside of my tube, then lined up my fabric and rolled it onto my tube, both at the body and the cap, and then I added extra glue at the seams to make sure that they would hold snugly. And I used my bone folder to try to press out any places that the fabric wasn't laying down flat. As I am learning now that we are in an office building, with any sort of thing that you are spraying on, make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area, because a lot of times they come with their own kind of like fumes and gases. Speaking of fumes, today's sponsor, Fume. Clever would be proud of that one. Fume is a flavored air device designed to help people quit smoking and vaping by breaking the hand-to-mouth pattern. It's simple, easy, no nicotine, no batteries. Just a weighty, twisty, fidgety tool that gives your hands something better to do. A lot of cravings and such aren't about the actual thing, it's about the habit. So Fume replaces the habit by giving you something else to satisfy the oral fixation. And now that I'm finally here, I can steal one of these for my own. If you ever see me on camera, I fidget hard. I'll normally play with my hair, or pick at my skin or clothes or just anything. I have destructive hands, but I also like things that smell good. Or in this case, smell and taste good. So I'm hoping that is a particularly destructive habit that Fume can help me get over. To me, all the flavors are great. They have like a sort of fresh vibrancy to them. But right now I'm definitely favoring the raspberry lemon. It's like two of my favorite things combined. Although the orange vanilla does call to me now that I'm no longer in Florida. I see oranges in my dreams. It's kind of like the air version of sparkling water. You have all of the different flavors. They're not super overpowering, but that brightness that I mentioned is almost like the carbonation of the sparkling water. I don't know, I like analogies. We know this to be true. You have to excuse my paint and glue covered hands. Painting with my hands is a habit I don't even think Fume can break me from. But if you're ready to break a bad habit, now's a great time to try Fume. Right now, when you grab the Journey Pack, you'll get a free Fume Topper when you use our code SKILLTREE. The Fume Topper is a soft, chewable mouthpiece that makes Fume something that you can also chew on. I'm not much of a chewer, but it is a nicer texture, and it makes it easier to clean when you take the mouthpiece off. So head over to tryfume.com, that's TRYFUM.com, and use our code SKILLTREE to get your free Fume Topper with your Journey Pack. Now I get to try all the flavors. He's been keeping them from me. Ooh, mango. What's this one? Black licorice, spicy. Mango. Maple pepper ones. Got like a nice warmth to it. Whoa. Ooh, this one smells awesome. White cranberry. And so at this point, we basically have a scroll case. It's just the point of decorating it. I didn't quite like the look of it being more flat, so I decided to embroider the edges with some decorative stitching, since I thought it would add a lot more like visual depth to it and make it look like it was actually sewn on rather than just like slapped on with glue. I decided to go for a blanket stitch, and I used waxed thread, which I wish I hadn't, but it's what was next to me from my bookbinding kit. Mostly because the wax thread tends to be kind of tight and doesn't give the same sort of like fluffy look as normal embroidery. But I guess it looks more rustic. A blanket stitch is really easy. You're basically just sewing down the line, kind of like a whip stitch, except you're making sure to kind of loop the needle through the previous thread so that it pulls it along the top and forms this kind of line. I ended up really liking this pattern of having longer and shorter stitches. It reminded me of like the floral ends of lace. I didn't get the greatest footage of me stitching all that on, mostly because stitching is horrendous to actually get footage of. But you get the idea. Once I was done with the decorative stitching, I decided I wanted to add a sort of closure using this button. My plan is to add something that's going to loop around the button from the cap so that it holds itself closed. So to sew the button on, I first went through one hole of the button, then I picked a place opposite of my seam from before and took a little bite of fabric with my needle, basically where I want the button to fall. Then I went back through the other hole of the button from the opposite side and pulled the button taut against the fabric. Once I decided I liked where it was, I just basically started going through the different holes of the button and then through that exact same spot over and over again. And also took a little bit of the extra fabric to wrap around the bottom of the button and form a shank so the button is raised from the fabric. That gives the loop that will eventually make a place to fit under it so it can more easily kind of slip into place. Once I was happy with all of that, I did a few more loops through the button to lock the shank into place, then went through the shank once I was at the bottom of the button to lock the whole thing into place. Once I was done with all that, I went in with more of my bookbinding glue around the decorative stitching just to give it a little bit of extra reinforcement. I don't want it to later unravel or get frayed or anything, so this will give it like a layer of protection. Once I was done with that, I got some of this fabric paint to start adding some depth and detail to the fabric as a whole. I basically just mixed some brown, green, and black to make a darker shade, watered it down a little bit, and then tapped it on where I wanted some shading. This adds a nice color variation so it doesn't look so flat and makes it look a little bit lived in and used. Then I went back in areas that I thought could use a little more brightness and did the exact same blend with less dark colors and a little bit more yellow. Once I was done with that, I did the exact same things but with pink acrylics for the areas that I had painted pink, and did kind of like a brownish wash for the paper itself. I use a trick I learned recently where I have basically like a darker brown of acrylic and I add it to the areas I want to be shaded. And then I get a wet paper towel and wipe away at the center and kind of push the paint toward the edges, which gives it a natural gradient. It makes it look a lot less like painted on and more natural. Then I went in with the fabric paint and decided to add some floral detailing at the bottom, since by then I was committed to the kind of hobbity vibe and it felt right. But since I had weathered everything else, those new details were a little bit too bright for me. So I took a little bit of watered down brown fabric paint and kind of just dabbed around the flowers that I had painted on after they were dry to make sure that they also had a layer of weathering. Now for the closure. I found this twine that I really liked, but I thought it was a little bit thin for what I wanted. But that is easy to solve. I just twisted it together to make it thicker. But when you twist it, you add torque. You add torque in that direction, and you'll notice that when you let it go, it kind of snaps together in the opposite direction, which is fine. You just have to connect the two sides that you were twisting so that they roll together evenly, and then it leaves you with an even thicker piece. Just something to plan around. Once I had those pieces, I cut one end so that the loop of being bent wasn't there anymore, and I glued that end and the end near the bigger loop, which I'm going to use to loop around my button, so that they would stay together. The twine actually came with these little cute paper label sets, so I decided to use one of them. Just wrapping it around the button and tying it with a piece of twine, and then cutting the twine off and gluing it down. I thought it looked cute, and it was something to do while the twine was drying. Once it's dry, I decided to play with how I want to wrap the twine around the button and the cap so that it forms a closure. I end up using super glue in little key points to hold it in place, just enough for me to feel out where it's gonna go and then lock it into place later with my bookbinding glue. I do the same thing for the bottom, kind of wrapping it around itself in a way that I like, and then end up pulling the excess up the back and connecting it to the piece that I cut off the top to form a little loop that I figured could go on a belt or something. Then I went over the whole thing with my bookbinding glue to make sure that it was locked in. And check it out, it's adorable. I did accidentally glue my loop a little bit too tight, so it doesn't close like the super glue. You'll see that it's not even. There's a little bit of extra at the top and the bottom. It must have shifted when I was gluing it, but it's like that forever now, unless I want to rip the fabric. But it opens and closes perfectly, besides the little bit of tightness with the loop. You can wrap the twine around the button, and look at it, it's adorable. You can hold it by the loop. But what if you want to make something even more customizable? I wanted to test if I could make this sort of function of having this cap that goes on and off and fits together without it being pre-made. Because once you know how to do that, you can make pretty much anything. So I busted out these craft paper rolls, and the piece of cardboard paper thing that's at the center of a paper towel roll. It's also all crumpled up and stuff because it was in the trash and then I decided to use it. But the average craft paper roll that you get is like 1.57 inches across, which fits perfectly into the size that like toilet paper rolls and paper towel rolls are. You see where I'm going? So I go through all the different steps that we went through with the previous one. I measure it, I cut out pieces of paper so that I can glue it to the inside and I can glue it to the tops and bottoms. But I don't have tops and bottoms yet, so I also use the craft paper that I've been using as templates to cut out little circles that I then glue to the bottoms of the craft rolls. Bigger than the craft roll themselves because I want to be able to sit the paper towel roll on top of them before I cut off the excess. While those were drying, I went to my paper towel roll and laid it down flat and used the measurements of the craft roll to mark where I wanted to cut the paper towel roll. Basically, I wanted to mimic this because I know that this kind of works, where it has this inner part, which will be the craft roll, then this outer part, which is going to be my paper towel roll. So I need the paper towel roll to be about the length of the craft roll, and then I'm going to cut off a bit at the top that's going to be my cap. I ended up wrapping the cut paper towel rolls in some normal paper that I had been using as a sort of shield to try and not get spray adhesive everywhere. You don't have to. I just felt bad for the paper. It felt like it was a waste and it was there, so I used it to wrap the outside of the paper towel rolls and maybe give them a little bit more structure. Once all that was dry, I cut out what was going to be the top of the cap. Basically what's going to go inside the paper towel roll. I left a little bit of the paper towel roll long because I knew that it was going to have to wrap around the top in order to form a bit of a shelf for that piece of craft paper to sit on, rather than just kind of gluing it to the sides. I cut little slits into that extra bit and then folded them down and then pushed the craft circle down to the bottom. Once it was there, I slid the entire thing onto the craft roll to make sure that it lined up at the very bottom rather than being too short. And it ended up being too short. So I just kept pushing until the craft paper pushed itself higher and then refolded the top of the paper towel roll to be that height instead of what I had cut it to. Happy with that, I went back in with some glue and glued the entire thing together at the top. And now I have two different tubes, one with a top and one with a bottom, and they slide together. And since I made the bottom a little bit bigger, when I slide the top on, it sits onto the bottom rather than sliding off. Now it's time to separate the top into the cap and the body. There's so many different terms when you're just kind of making up a process. I cut up the side of the body until I get to the line that I marked of where I want my cap to start. Then I cut along that line, cutting the cap off of the body. This leaves me with the body cut open and the cap freed to do its cap self. I tape the body back together with some duct tape and then decide I want to make the craft roll a little bit thicker, and I do this by applying layers of tape. I only have painter's tape, but you can buy actual craft tape, which would look a lot better and you wouldn't have to kind of cover it later on like I do because it's bright blue. But tape in general lets you adjust the thickness one layer at a time until the body fits snugly. Basically, we just want it snug enough that when you put the cap on, it doesn't fall off immediately. Once I was happy with how snug it was, I actually took a little bit of tape off so that I could put a piece of paper on, since it's gonna add thickness. mostly so that I could cover the bright blue of the tape. Then I slid the body of the scroll case on, made sure I liked how it fit, slid it back off so I could add glue to where it's gonna go, and then pushed it back into place over the glue, and then went over some of the outside seams with some glue to really lock it into place. And that's starting to look like the base that we used to make the previous scroll case. I left the paper at the top a little bit long because I knew that I would have to fold over the inside of the scroll case, similar to how we've done with other seams. Because this is gonna be a seam that is gonna be like seen, I fold it over itself once and then again before pushing it down. So you're not seeing just like the raw edge of paper. Then I add a bunch of glue so that it will stay that way and also have a decent amount of structure, considering that's gonna be rubbing against the cap every time that you open and close it. While it's wet with the glue, I also went in and really like formed it down because paper gets a little bit more malleable when it's wet. Even going in with my bone folder to really press it down. I want this to be as kind of dense and structured as possible because it's going to be getting the most friction. While I liked my little solution of folding down the top of the cap to be able to have a top, I didn't quite like the look of it, so I ended up cutting out another kind of piece of craft paper that's got the fancy paper on either side and then gluing it to the top. That way you don't see the layers of thing folded over the inside. Then I added the interior fancy paper to this one, but I left it a little bit long because I'm starting to like the results when I do that little slicey thing and then folding it over the edges. And with that, we're pretty much at the exact same place that this one was before we started putting on the fabric. Sure, it looks messier, but once we cover it with something, you won't see that. What I decide to cover it with is this roll of pleather, because again, cheap. I do the same thing I did with the handkerchief where I measure the outside and cut out different pieces to glue around the body and cap of the scroll case. For the leather, I want to actually fold the edges to give a false seam. So I cut out a little bit of craft paper, the width of the seam that I want to have, so I can mark it with some chalk and then use some super glue to fold it over itself. I'm going to use super glue a lot because at this point I am running out of time because I'm kind of doing two different projects. And this was the original one that I wanted to work on, but then I got too enamored with my little test piece. And now it's beautiful, and so I'm going to use super glue. By the way, you will see a bunch of like other scroll cases in various states of construction that didn't really make it into the video. I am still learning how to not make just like 6 videos at a time because there's so much I want to do, and it isn't until I'm having to record it that I realize how much content that is. It's so tempting now that I have an actual workshop to just like play forever. Once the little fake seams are done, I just glue it onto the body of the scroll case and do the exact same thing onto the cap. So for this one, I painted the inside pink. For the leather one, I want to paint the inside almost kind of like a jeweled black green. The friend that gave me this idea, his character has like a green cat's eye bracelet. He wants that to be his colors. So I wanted to make this particular scroll case for him. To get that effect, I first went in with a layer of black metallic acrylic paint as a base coat. I know there's a bunch of glue and stuff on this, so I'm not super concerned if it doesn't go on evenly. This is just the base coat, and I'll paint another layer over it. While that was drying, I busted out some of this leather trim that has stitches already in it. I think this one in particular is supposed to be used in cars to add like fake leather trim, but it works really well if you want to make something look like it's been stitched together, but it isn't. I just super glued the edges together like I did the pleather to give it fake seams, and then glued it down onto the main seam itself. Before I finish off the kind of painted top, I want to add detailing to the leather. So I got this kit of leather paints, which is usually just like an acrylic paint that's been made more flexible so that when it dries, it won't crack and stuff if it's being moved around on a flexible surface. I use a black and a brown to kind of go into the pleather and add shading and detailing, eventually just defaulting to using my fingers. I've yet to find a better tool of only catching high points than having paint on your finger and just running your finger over it. Also, I like a lot of like randomness when I'm painting weathering, so just kind of like smothering my fingers all over it gives me that randomness. Once that was dry, I went back to the painted top of my scroll case and busted out some of this green mica powder that I think Kit had left over from working with different resins in earlier projects. Maybe when he made like resin dice. I mixed it with a gloss finish Mod Podge, which might make it look lighter when I put it on, but the Mod Podge dries clear, so it should keep a lot of the vibrancy. I kind of just randomly painted around almost like a marble pattern. I know I'm supposed to be going for cat's eye, but it's not really easy to do that on this kind of shape. So I just decided to go for more marbly, because it's basically like cat's eye, but a lot of them all at once. Then I went over the whole thing with a thin layer of the black with some of the green mica in it, and then went over again with the green, so that I could have kind of like a depth effect to it, where it looks like there's different layers of green veining through it. Once I was happy with the paint job, I went in with some water-based polyurethane as a protective coating. Polyurethane is a relatively strong protective coating, but I know that it's gonna be getting a lot of friction, and it's painted paper. So I'm pretty happy with overdoing it. Honestly, the water-based polyurethane is becoming a bit of a favorite of mine for sealing things. It's so easy to put on, and it dries super fast, and it doesn't have like the heavy fumes of like oil-based polyurethane. Although, I will say that even with that on, it did start to tear a little bit at the top. So I added just a really thin layer of super glue there, because the super glue tends to be good with friction, and I didn't catch any footage of it. But later on, I decided to try some of this microcrystalline wax polish onto the tops of these, which basically you just apply a thin layer, you let it harden a little bit, and then you buff it. But when I add it to the two parts that are going to be sliding together, it adds a bit of like a dry lubricant, so they can slide really easily against each other without causing a lot of friction or pull. Because sometimes when you paint something, or even when you seal it with something like polyurethane, it has almost like a stickiness to it when they're pressed up against each other, especially if this is going to be outside in the heat. But once I was happy with the scroll case thus far, I decided to try and figure out how to keep it closed. That this was a frustrating process, and I was already in a rush, so I decided in the end to just add this little key to the front with a green gem in the center, and not add like a permanent closure. Mostly because I had already tightened it with the tape and stuff, and it was so snug that it really wasn't gonna fall off accidentally. And because I was out of time, and I was already damaging it with my many failed attempts of trying to rush a closure. But look at it, it's so cute. And I feel like these two proved our idea. These were stupidly easy, even with me having to figure out how to record it and do it on a very tight time scale. And they came out super sturdy and awesome. And with the wax, they open and close so easily, but I can like throw this against a wall and it's not gonna come off by itself. And it's such a satisfying noise. One thing I did do is I punched a tiny hole through the bottom with an awl, because I found that it was so airtight that you couldn't close it easily because the air didn't have a place to go. I wonder if this one just has like enough space between its seams that that's not a problem. But this one was very well constructed enough that it was having an air pressure problem. But the hole will be helpful because even if there's like water or something gets into it, it gives a place for drainage. I doubt you're gonna put that small of a scroll into it. You'd have to put quite a lot of pressure on this to get it to open not normally, especially with the angle. So you could put this on your belt, it will not come off. But then that'd be cool, because then you could actually like leave it on your belt and open and close it. I think I made a useful thing, guys. And I could make so many of them because they're so cheap and easy. And since I made this one from scratch, I could technically glue more tubes together and make them any size that I want, or just make tubes from scratch with like those big rolls of craft paper and make them any width I want. And that's what I was trying to play with, which is if this could work, and then if we could make our own and it would still work, you can now scale that to whatever you want. But it definitely was an experiment. With any experiments on this channel, please let me know if there's any other way that you think that these could be improved or this idea could be taken further. You can do so many things with these. I wasn't trying to go for a Hobbity one in the beginning, but I did. And I know that the Hobbit LARP has like a mail game, so I think it'd be really fun for people to have little like mail containers on their belts and such. I don't know, I'm just a proud little mama of my cute little scroll case babies. If you like these kinds of crafts, let us know in the comments and leave a like on the video. I'll leave all the materials that I used in the description below, and if you guys try it, I'd love to see the different designs and such you come up with. In the meantime though, keep leveling up, you. Greetings travelers, you've made it to the end screen. YouTube loves it when you watch all the way to the end, and it's a great way to support our channel. Another great way to support our channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These people are our Patreon members, and we could not do this without them. It's because of these people that we are able to have an office, and I'm able to play with random craft inspiration ideas now. And as always, a special shout out to our Grandmaster tier patron, Froggy. Thank you so much to all of you. If you'd like to become a patron, check out the link in the description below. Otherwise, you can support our channel by watching these videos, and that helps a lot too. Now I'm gonna go clean up my little explosion of paper and glue. Because now Clever has to go make a video, and we're sharing the same workspace, and both of us like to just explode everywhere. It's a learning process.